see here. Let's see.
Oh.
Can folks hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Georgia.
Hello. Roy's here too. You just can't see him.
Okay. I believe you. Oh, see, I heard him. We'll give it a few more minutes. I see Sam.
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, Sam.
Hi,
Sam.
Georgia. Hey, Lois.
It's interesting to me to see who is tuning into Zoom and who may not be. And I see a lot of the same folks who would be here in person. You know, those who come to shul seem to come to Zoom, and those who don't come to shul don't necessarily come to Zoom, even though we're coming to your house. So just interesting that with all of the virtual connection, I'm not sure that I've seen huge differences in how people are who connects and who doesn't. So food for thought. Interesting. Let's see, who else do we have on the line? We have Meetings JJC. Oh, okay, I see Danielle. Okay, Danielle changed her name to Meetings JJC.
It's a nice name.
Yeah, it's a very nice name, except if you abbreviate it and call her Meet, or just call her Meetings.
She could say, I'm me.
Oh, even better.
Yeah.
There you go. See, that's why it's good to have you on the line, Lois.
I'm always useful.
Okay, let's see. So we got 5 of us. Does everybody have their coffee?
Oh,
Tea.
already drank it.
Okay.
I'm
Today
having
the
tea
coffee-
and Torah today.
The Torah's on us. Oh, okay. Coffee has got to be on you, unfortunately. But out of nostalgia, I did brew this in my own coffee maker. So,
Good.
so it's almost like regular coffee and Torah. All right. Well, we'll get started. You might want a chumash. What I think I'm going to do is see if I can. You may not see me for a moment, but hopefully you'll hear me. I'm going to try and send folks an email with the sheets. I prepared 2 sheets. You
Yeah, I
guys
am
want
here.
that? Let's see.
Very good.
All right. So,
Yeah, I'll move this.
all right.
Bye.
If you can hear me, let me give. I'm going to put everybody's email addresses. Okay. It's funny because all I have, Lois, are your 2 synagogue addresses.
They ain't no good no more.
I know that. So give me an alternative.
Well, Tompkins Tutor
There it is. Okay, I got it.
should be. You've sent me stuff, yeah.
Yeah, it just doesn't come up as the first one. Okay. Sam, do you have an email address that
Yes,
Go ahead.
Sam is Sam Zucker at Comcast.net.
Sam's okay. I got it right here. Okay. Roy, Georgia.
And we have a Hamash.
No. These are the study sheets.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Roy Go at earthlink.net.
Wait, let's see. Roy. Yep.
Okay.
Got it. Okay. And I'll send it to Danielle too. Sure. Although Danielle has coffee and Torah study sheets. I'm going to attach files. Right, let's do it this way. Okay. Cool. All right. I just sent everybody the sheets. I know I can put them up on Zoom,
Send it an email.
but I would I think it's better for you to have them for yourselves.
Okay, waiting.
Oh, there you are.
Okay, so let me just I'll do a very quick overview of what's in Parshat Vayikra, and then we'll look at 2 passages in depth using our sheets, and then just have a little bit of open conversation about, you know, where we find our own connection and relevance to this Torah portion. Vayikra is all about sacrifices. Not every single exhaustive type of sacrifice, but some very basic information about major types. I'm going to turn off my email because it is giving me. Okay. There we go. Okay, here we go. All right, so what Vayikra does is to start off with the Olah. The Olah is a whole burnt offering, reduced to ashes, except for its hide. Gloria, I had sent sheets to everybody, study sheets. Let me send them to you.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm late.
Okay, here we go.
I have the 8-time Chumash.
Okay, let me see. Okay, I'm sending it now to you. Okay, so you should have the.
Let me see if I can.
Should have gone out. There we go. Okay.
Thank you very much.
So the Olah is a whole burnt offering, excuse me, reduced to ashes except for its hide. And no part of the Olah is eaten. There are certain types of Olot that are brought for the entire community, like the daily Olah, Olat Tamid. There are also types of Olah that are brought by individuals. There is a sliding price scale, if you will, for those who are bringing a whole burnt offering. It is a male, it's a bull or a male sheep or certain birds. So obviously a whole bull is going to be the most expensive. It's the Cadillac of offerings. Sheep are somewhere in the middle, and a bird would be at the lower end. So when the olah is brought by an individual, there is a, if you will, a sliding scale of economic threshold, which reflects the fact that there are differing, socioeconomic groupings of people back then as now, and there's a certain sensitivity with which the whole system is designed that you can't ask people to reach beyond their financial means. The role of ritual sometimes, creates a threshold in addition to a structure, but that you have to try to keep the threshold low so that people can meet it and not be denied because they're not possessed of certain means. Next up in the Parshat is the mincha, right? The grain offering. In terms of its sanctity, a mincha is considered to be on par with an olah, interestingly, but it's obviously a less costly alternative. There are times when a mincha might be brought by itself. At other times, it might be part of a larger configuration, such as some of the holiday offerings. So what is this grain offering? It's semolina. Okay, so it's semolina flour mixed with oil, olive oil, and frankincense. And part of it is given to God, and the Kohanim would consume the remaining portion. So you would scoop out the first portion of the mixture. That would be burnt on the altar, and the Kohanim would have the remainder.
But Rabbi, Rabbi, can I ask? Yes, the part that goes to the Kohanim, that's already cooked and prepared, and the part that's burnt, that's uncooked.
Well, no, it gets cooked through the offering. But the Kohanim would, yes, they would bake it before eating it. Raw flour is really not a great thing to eat.
But the part that went to the Kohanim, I thought it was already cooked. Like they talk about being on a griddle and baked and that sort of thing.
Yes, they would once the part that was given to God was offered, the rest was for them to. They essentially would make bread out of it.
Well, they would cook it, not the offerer. The offerer wouldn't cook it. The Kohanim would cook it.
The Kohanim, the person who, if they brought a mincha, was not partaking of the mincha. So part went to God and part went to the Kohanim, and the rest went to the Kohanim, period.
But it's in its raw form.
Yes.
When they consumed it in a cooked form.
But who cooks it?
The Kohanim.
Okay, that's what we wanted to know.
Thank you, Lois.
Is that it?
Okay. The Kohanim are cooking it for themselves. It's a Kohen cookout. Okay, and chametz was never offered on the altar, not just during Pesach, at any time. So you would never put, a starter into this, or interestingly enough, honey. And I'm not sure I understand fully the reasoning behind the honey, but neither honey nor leaven was ever included in the mincha. The Parsha also goes on to talk about the role of salt. And we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about, sacred sodium. But salt is included in every offering. Probably, and this is a little speculative, it was mandated specifically for meat, and then extended also to the mincha, the grain offerings, for the sake of consistency and uniformity, that everything is brought with salt. Salt has, a unique property of drawing blood from meat, even, blood that you can remove blood by draining, by washing, but there is still some blood that remains residually in the tissue. Salt will draw that blood to the surface, right? So to this day, meat that is kosher, assuming it's been slaughtered in a kosher way, still has to be salted and soaked. I don't know anybody, kosher butchers and all of the large companies now do this. But I remember, kosher meat as a child. My mom had this big shissel, and she would salt and soak the meat in the basement and with the kosher salt. And so it's funny, everybody uses kosher salt now, but the reason for its existence and development is really, at least commercially at the retail level, doesn't exist anymore. I have not seen in 20 years meat that came unsalted and soaked, except for organ meat, which you can't kosher that way anyway. It has to be broiled. But anyway, so since the blood is drained from the meat, the salt is helpful in making that happen. And it's interesting to see the nexus here between koshering meat that we eat and the sacrificial ritual that took place on the altar. We'll get back to that. A couple of other things that are found in the Parsha. The Zevach Shlamim, sometimes called the sacrifice of well-being. This was a sacrifice that was brought by people as a form of gratitude. It was a way of saying thank you. Part of the shlamim would be offered to God. Part would be given to the Kohanim, and part would be consumed by the donor. The Kadosh Baruch Hu, God seems to like organ meats. So certain fatty portions were given to God, right? So your liver, the kidneys, those were the things that were reserved for offering on the sacrifice. Maybe God didn't want us to eat cholesterol-laden meat, but for whatever reason. So it's divided between, and not equally, actually probably by weight. Less went to God and more went to the Kohanim and to the donor. And the Parsha ends, interestingly.
Robert, I'm sorry. I apologize for interrupting, but can I ask a question on this? Would every time that you wanted to eat meat from your flock, did you have to go through this, or did you always, were there many times when it was permissible to eat from to eat a sheep and to not make this offering, to eat all the sheep yourself? Was that also permissible?
It would seem that originally there was a prohibition of shchita outside of the sanctuary area, but by the time of Deuteronomy, it is totally relaxed. You can shecht and eat your own food. You have to make sure that you are draining the animal of all of its blood, right? But no, I mean the short answer is you would bring a zevach shlamim for certain occasions to express one's thanks. But if you were just making Shabbos dinner,
Yes.
you could go to your flock and shech the goat. Absolutely. The last two types of korbanot, of sacrifices, and they're related to one another, but they're somewhat different in subtle ways. The chatat and the asham. Sometimes it's called the sin offering and the guilt offering, which are not really great translations. I think the Eitz Chaim calls one a purification offering. That would be the chatat. And the asham is known as a reparation offering. And both refer to, in cases of unintentional error. In other words, if you transgress a particular commandment unwittingly. Now, the transgression may be you knew about it. In other words, you knew what the law was, but you performed the action unwittingly. You didn't realize that what you were doing involved a transgression, or you were unaware of what the law was. But either way, what you didn't do, and this is really important, what you didn't do is to intentionally break God's law, or that you intentionally violated a commandment. For that, there might be expiation, there might not. It would depend on what the particular transgression was. But what we're talking about here completely is error. Things that you've done wrong that you weren't aware, either that you had done them or that they were wrong. So now the chatat could be brought by a leader. It could be brought by, right, including a kohen or a chieftain, right, a nasi of a tribe. It could be brought by an individual. It could be brought if the entire people had done something wrong unwittingly. The asham is a first cousin to the chatat, in as much as, it involves unwitting error, right? But it's a more specific category. If you misuse or destroy property that belonged to the temple, right, or to the Mishkan, the tabernacle, including things that have been consecrated. We've talked a little bit about this in our Talmud class, but let's say Gloria has consecrated a particular goat for the use of the Mishkan, which means it can either be offered or sold and the money used for the Mishkan. And then, Gloria is a goat dealer, and, she makes a mistake. She had designated, one goat for the sanctuary's use, but it got mixed up. It was a busy day in her goat dealing, and somehow one goat wandered from one part of the yard into another. And so suddenly, unwittingly, for Gloria and for me, I had bought the goat that had been consecrated, and then she looked at the receipt, the transaction, said, "Oh my gosh, that was the consecrated goat." There was no intention, no malice aforethought, but that would be an error that would be corrected by bringing in Asham. The other aspect of the Asham is that what if you weren't sure that you had made a mistake? And that happens to people, right? We, when you're counting money, did I count that bill? Or when you're, cooking and wait, did I put in the salt yet? Or I don't remember. So people are, they make mistakes. They're unwitting errors, but sometimes they're not sure if they did it or not. So if you are uncertain about whether you've even committed a mistake, that would be another case where one would bring in Asham. So in the case of the Chatat, you know after the fact that it was wrong, but it was a mistake. The Asham would be if you thought, I just don't, I'm not sure if I made a mistake or not. And that's where Vayikra ends. So we have 5 different kinds of offerings, right, which run the gamut, right, for expressing our thanks or for repairing breaches that we have made in the fabric of our covenant with God, but unwittingly, right, being human and making mistakes. So let me just stop here for a moment, and any questions or thoughts so far?
And can I ask this? Going back to the mincha and the prohibition about putting any leavening agent in there, is this concern about leavening agent, is this all tied in with the Exodus and inability to bake the bread, and also the festival of the unleavened bread? Are they all having the same root?
I think we could make that connection homiletically, midrashically. I don't know that, historically, anthropologically, what the answer would be to that. It's an interesting question. Midrashically, absolutely. And the rabbis do. Because chametz takes on all sorts of, qualities and character and attributes. And the fact that you don't bring it onto the altar is, there's a lot you can do with that for a sermon. So yes, in Midrash for sure, whether there was some sort of, anthropological concern here with chametz beyond the story of the Exodus from Egypt, that I don't have the answer to, at least not offhand. I could look around. If you look at the sheet, it says mining the riches of a single verse.
Can I just ask a question first?
Sure.
With these sacrifices that you bring, I mean, is this only when you go to the temple, or you save up your sins and then you say, okay, here's 4 bulls that I have for this and this and this sin, and then I come?
That's a great question. That's a great question. And what we don't know is the extent to which the system worked outside of the local region. Now, if the Israelites were encamped in the desert, there you have proximity throughout the camp. Once the Israelites are settled in Eretz Yisrael, we really don't know. Now, we do have specific accounts of people coming to the sanctuary, and especially for the regalim, right, for the pilgrimage festivals. We have lots and lots of historical and textual data. how people handled the day-to-day, especially, in the first temple period, if they had particular transgressions, that I don't know. So what the Torah is describing is, an ideal or a legal system
Got it.
that might not have,
Thank you very much. Oh.
fully ever been put into
Bye.
place, right? If you think about our judicial system, right? Justice is blind and fair play, and everybody is equal before the law, right? If you read legal codes and the Constitution, you'll see, a beautifully ordered system that should work flawlessly. We all know that isn't the case. So the extent to which, right, people made appointments or just showed up or saved up their transgressions or perhaps didn't come, right? We do know from plenty of places in Nevi'im and in the prophets that folks were throughout most of the first temple period building altars on their own. They weren't supposed to do that, right? There was a centralized sanctuary in Jerusalem. So, but people, and that's all over the Tanakh. It's in the book of Judges and Samuel and Kings, and sometimes efforts to put down individual shrines and altars that were popping up locally. But that probably reflects the fact that the journey to Jerusalem was too difficult and cumbersome. And after the divided kingdom, folks who were living in the north were actively discouraged, sometimes even prevented from going to Jerusalem. So I think what we have in Leviticus is an idealized description, and we just will never know how fully it was actually implemented or practiced.
Thank you.
Sure. So I want to go back to, I'm sorry, we were going to do Mining the Riches of a Single Verse, but let's jump to the other sheets. There were two. They were part of the same file. And this had to do with salt. Right, and if you have the sheet, you'll see there are a couple of scriptural sources. One from our Parshat that talks about Melach Brit Elohecha, right? The salt of your covenant with God. And then one from Midbar Numbers, and then one from Ezekiel and Ezra, which clearly show the carry-through of salt and its sacrificial ritual. So let me ask, just to open this up, why would salt be included in all sacrificial rituals, right? And why elevate salt to covenantal status? And there's no single right answer. Just, what are your thoughts? Why would salt? We talked one about a practical aspect of salt drawing blood out of the meat, but it's also included in meal offerings too, where that's irrelevant.
Well, wasn't salt considered to be a bit of a luxury?
I
I
would say more of a necessity, because it, right, what does salt do?
It preserves
Especially
things.
before,
preserves food.
okay, so it's a preservative. So salt was, pretty indispensable in antiquity. So why might, why might the Torah see salt as being important to sacrificial ritual? And you can look, if you have the sources, you can look at any of them in the sheet. And I'll give you a little push that the covenantal aspect is right. Brit Melach, a covenant of salt, it actually appears in a couple of different places. So, what's a covenantal aspect of salt? Somebody said it before. Yeah.
Is it a tie-in with, blood is, salt draws out blood, and blood is really life, and life is given from God, and
That's certainly a part of its function. But again, think about the word brit, right? What makes what makes something a covenant? A covenant should be obviously between two parties, and what else? What's the
Something
status
tangible.
of tangible? Okay. And what else about covenants? They're typically meant to be
To last a long time, and salt is a preservative.
right. So covenants are really not covenants in a religious sense, unless they are long lasting, even eternal. Otili olam, right? We talk about Shabbat. It is a covenant to me in perpetuity. Brit milah, right? The idea of from generation to generation, we have this covenant that affirms in perpetuity our propagation, right? Having children. So salt, especially in the ancient world, nothing could be a clearer expression of the long-lasting, right? Salt is used in a daily sense to keep things from spoiling. And if you think about the tangible aspect of sacrifice, right? You are seeing, smelling, touching, having something that is a tangible fact of preservation within the sacrificial ritual takes on a degree of great significance, especially since what happens to the animal on the altar or the meal offering, anything. It doesn't stay on the altar, right? And sacrifices are brought continually. It's not like you make a sacrifice once and then you're done for the rest of your life, right? Certain kinds of covenantal relationships like Brit Milah, their permanence is in the act itself, right? Once you've been circumcised, you're circumcised. But sacrifices are offered again and again, cyclically. Another holiday comes, another holiday, another day, another error that you made, another reason to express your gratitude. So the inclusion of salt in all those sacrifices is a way of making a ritual statement about permanence.
No.
So
Interesting.
why then, how do we use salt today? Besides making sure that our chicken soup is sufficiently salted, because otherwise it's fat. Low sodium chicken soup is okay, but chicken soup without salt, no thanks. So besides that,
So this is why people sprinkle the salt on the challah on Shabbat?
and there are folks who do it every day, actually. So it's,
Oh,
I think we associate, probably because people are more likely to say hamotzi and even more likely to wash their hands ritually on Shabbat than on other days. Somebody asked me some months ago, why do Jews ritually wash their hands before breaking bread on the Sabbath? And it wasn't a Jewish person, but it could have easily been. And I said, well, actually, that's, in practical terms, many people only do it on Shabbat, but that's really, anytime you break bread. So let's look at, if you have this sheet on salt and covenant, and if you look toward the bottom of the first page where it's from Ezekiel 23, and you sat on a grand couch with a set table before it, Shulchan Aruch, and it was my incense and my oil you laid upon it, right? The phrase Shulchan Aruch, of course, gets used as the title of a very, very famous work of Jewish law by Rabbi Yosef Karo, who writes his magnum opus, or actually the Shulchan Aruch is only kind of a summary of his magnum opus. But you have a set table, and on it incense, right? We associate incense with the altar, right? And my oil, whether it's the anointing oil or oil for a whole burnt offering, a mincha offering. So we have here in Yechezkel an association between the table that we set and sacrifice.
And the idea that salt is always supposed to be on a table, even if no one's eating there.
That's a minhag,
Huh.
but that's not a matter of halacha. But you have this association. Now here, salt is not referred to specifically, but what is referred to is this notion of your table somehow being associated with aspects of sacrifice. And in rabbinic literature, this actually, is made explicit and the parallel very clear, right? You look at the last source from Chagigah, right? When the temple stood, the altar would bring atonement to a person. But now a person's dining table brings atonement to him. Right? So we talk about substitutes for the institution of sacrifice. So one is, what's one in a world that we can't bring sacrifice? What's one substitution that rabbinic Judaism teaches?
Prayer.
Prayer, absolutely. Our prayer services at set times during the day are stand-ins for the times that communal sacrifices were brought. What else?
Learning, study.
Doing it right now, study of Torah. In fact, in the Gemara, in the Talmud, it says, studying the laws of sacrifice are considered to be like one has fulfilled them fully and in their entirety. So right now you're making sacrifices. And then that actually is extended even farther, that in general, the study of Torah is like bringing a sacrifice. One more beside the table.
Mitzvah?
Well, performing acts of kindness, right? For those who, who come to shul at 9 a.m., there is a passage we sometimes read from Avot to Rabbi Natan, only on Shabbat mornings, about how Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai were walking on the ruins of the Temple Mount, and Rabbi Yehoshua was all upset. We can't atone for our sins, no more sacrifice. And Yochanan ben Zakkai, quoting scripture from the prophet Hosea, says, no, we can. Through acts of loving kindness, through gimilut chasadim, we can bring atonement. So we've had all of these substitutes, right, replacements, and this is in that family. Our tables can be altars. And it's not, it really is not so far-fetched if you consider that any number of sacrifices were also eaten by the Kohen and sometimes by the donor, right? We got a big one coming up, Korban Pesach, right? So to partake of the Paschal offering, that was your main course at the Seder. So this notion that our table ritual is an extension of the altar that existed. Once upon a time, it was literally an extension. You could not eat your sacrifice in the state of ritual impurity, right? There were laws about, how many people you needed so that there would be no leftovers. Leftovers weren't for lunch the day after the Seder. I mean, now they are, but back then, if you didn't finish it by dawn, it had to be burnt in its entirety. So how we consumed korbanot, like the Paschal offering, that was, an extension of the offering itself. So this idea that your table is an extension of the altar, which I think is a very, powerful image, is not far-fetched, and it's actually rooted in real practice from thousands of years ago.
I don't know, I find it very problematic to say that now a person's dining table brings atonement to him.
Well, I don't mean, I don't think that should be understood as what you made boiled spinach and it was limp and God is unhappy, so you won't have your sins atoned for. I think it's how you approach eating that makes you, worthy of atonement. Do you, right? What are the religious practices at your table? Do you say brachot? Do you say birkat hamazon? Are you grateful to God if for the gift of the food? Do you share your bread with those who are hungry? It's not the nature of the spread that you put out, but how you approach the idea of eating with gratitude, with humility, with generosity. Just as once upon a time, sacrificial offerings were meant to connect you to God now what we do at our tables, makes us more or less, right? If we just throw some food on the table, we don't, eat thoughtfully, gratefully, don't share with those who are hungry. It's like bringing a sacrifice to the altar that would be blemished.
That seems to be more of an appreciation for what you have and to acknowledge that, and that, you know, the source of all things come from God. I don't quite see it in the sense of a sacrifice. I'm not, you know, I have a hard time getting that connection back when people would bring something of their own and give it away and have smells, and you know, I'm missing the connection at this point.
Okay.
Sorry.
Just keep in mind that the word korban is from the root kuf resh bet, likarev, to come closer. So the point of sacrifice was an opportunity for the person who offered it to feel closer to God. Now, for our ancestors, that was in a very, very physical way, very hands-on, very sense-oriented. For us today, how we approach something as basic as eating is an opportunity to also come closer to God. You know, in lots of different ways. Food meditation. There is a whole, right, chewing slowly and really tasting the food. Jay Michelson has a book called God in Your Body. He has a whole chapter about, you know, tasting God. The recitation of brachot before we eat, and Birkat Hamazon, grace after meals, after we eat. The nexus between kashrut, right? All of these sacrificial laws that have strong roots in what was brought to the altar and how it was offered, right? So, you know, there is a sense that, and the very fact that one of the primary sources of kashrut is in the book of Leviticus, surrounded by sacrificial law, it's not accidental. So all of those things are for us ways of turning our tables into altars, right? And, you know, I would use the word altar in a very symbolic way. We're not bringing sacrifices like our ancestors, but if an altar is a place where we elevate our spiritual consciousness, then, you know, then it is in a sense like an altar. If you look at the top of, I'm sorry, go ahead. Did you want to say something? I thought I heard somebody. If you look at the top of the second page from that handout, right, it's a mitzvah to bring salt to the table before breaking bread, because the table resembles an altar, right? That's an echo of the source from Chagigah, and eating is like a sacrifice. Again, it's not like a sacrifice, but it's like a sacrifice in the idea of coming closer to God, creating mindfulness and spiritual awareness. And here, the Ramah, who writes the Ashkenazic gloss to the Shulchan Aruch, says, with all your offerings, you must offer salt, right? Bringing the basic source from the Torah. I think this is one of the ways in which, as we look at these sacrificial laws, we can find, you know, relevance for ourselves. Not because we are practicing, you know, to return to a third temple. There are folks who are. But because these were sacred institutions for our ancestors, and even the rabbis living in a world beyond the temple weren't trying to, you know, reinvent a religion. Or I should say, to invent a religion. they were looking to take old wine and to transfer it to new bottles, right? To take the authenticity of our ancient teachings and find ways to relate to them that were appropriate and mindful of the developments of the time. So what they did was, in one way, very radical, but also in another way, very traditional, because they didn't say, oh gosh, we don't have a temple anymore. Let's just get rid of all this, sacrificial stuff. We don't need it anymore. And, maybe we can warehouse it somewhere if a temple ever gets rebuilt, but let's invent something. We'll call it prayer. And then we'll have something else. Let's see. Oh, yes, acts of loving kindness. What they're doing is they're drawing direct lines from the tradition in very new ways, but are rooted in that soil and are nurtured by that soil of the past. So I want to ask folks, why does this matter? Like the table, Brit Melach, it's very nice. Our tables should be like altars. It's wonderful, right? That we wash our hands, right? We become like Kohanim. Our table is somewhere we officiate at. That gives a very different feel to the act of eating. It makes it seem like it's a religious act, which it is. But why else? Why else should we care about korbanot? What do they have to teach us?
We stop before we eat, when I prepare things and put everything out on the table. Before you say the blessing, you have to be grateful and just aware of everything. And if you don't stop, you really have to just stop and think. And this makes you stop and think. Otherwise, you throw this stuff in your mouth and not be aware.
But that's the blessing, just not the sacrifice.
Well, I'm doing my best.
I mean,
That's all good.
No, I think
One of the
it's
things
right.
that I always think about, we talk about the 611 commandments, 613 commandments. What is about a third of them have to do with sacrifice? So we talk
I
about
haven't counted, but yeah, a significant amount, or the laws of Tuma and Tara, ritual purity and impurity. Yeah, for sure. A third of the Mishnah, actually, you're counting by pages, more than a third, maybe closer to 40%, are the last two orders of the Shas, of the Shisha Sidrei Mishnah, which are Kodashim and Torah. So between the laws that pertain to sacrifice in the temple and ritual purity and impurity, that's 40% of the Mishnah. Not, the Talmud, not, because most of those tractates don't have a Gemara to them, so there's no, Amaraic discussion. But in the Mishnah, yeah, that's
amazing.
It is a huge part of our tradition.
And sacrifices had stopped by that time, obviously.
Yes, but you preserve sacred, just like salt is a preservative. Consciousness and memory are preservatives too, and it's important that it was important to our rabbis that we preserve our past, right? As we know, forgetfulness makes things cease to exist.
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
Any other thoughts about why korbanot are important to us today, as metaphor, as allegory, as model, not in a literal sense? Well, let me share a couple of other thoughts with you. And you can also look, we're not going to go through this source by source, but the second sheet was mining the riches of a single verse. And it's at the very beginning of the Parsha, second verse of Parshat Vayikra. And the rabbis, not just, especially the Hasidim and the mystics had a field day with the wording. Ki akriv mikem korban ladonai min abehima min abakar. When a person offers from among you. And why it says from among you. It should simply say when a person offers a sacrifice, ... So, when
the idea that it's a communal thing, that it's not just one person and what they choose to do, but it involves the whole community.
Yes, well, that's one explanation from Toldot Yitzchak. It was a Hasidic commentary. That's at the very bottom. That it starts out the verse in the singular and ends in the plural. Right? When one offers a sacrifice to God as an individual, he brings merit to the entire community. The system of korbanot certainly depended on community. The Kohanim were supported by the community. The Mishkan and later the temple were built by the community. There was a constant interplay of the community and the individual and the community, which is as true of synagogue life and Jewish community today.
Maybe it's
go ahead, Gloria.
That people are missing this idea of being close to God, and the whole perception that people really felt this closeness when they made the sacrifices, that the whole system made them feel that they were in touch with God on a reliable level, whereas for us it's kind of unreliable.
Okay. That's true, but I think that that idea that there is this important tie between the individual and the community is still very much, maybe in some ways for us, living with this sense of complete individual and autonomous entitlement, right? That people, like the young man who said, if I get the corona, I'll get the corona, and then, apologize for it. Or a tweet I saw online about a woman going into a fast food joint, the former Miss Nevada, who said, this is America, I'll do what I want.
Wow.
So the notion that the community depends on the individual and the individual depends on the community, that certainly underlines the whole system of sacrifice, but it also underlines our well-being today, 2,000 years after the temple. But if you look at the top source from the Shalah, Rabbi Yeshayahu Horovitz, he's called the Shalah because that's the acronym for his magnum opus, was the Shnei Luchot Abrit. He lived in the 16th century. When a person offers from among you, yakriv mikem, literally from within you, among you, but it can also mean within you. It is a sacred vessel worthy of being a sacrifice to God. Yakriv mikem korban ladonai, right? If you bring your inner awareness, your spiritual best self to the act, it is a sacrifice to God. Otherwise, if you simply are doing it out of obligation or reluctantly or thoughtlessly, mina behema, right? Mina behema, mina bakar, mina tzon, takrivu et korbanchem. But if you don't bring your innerness to it, it's not a sacrifice to God, but your offering is like that of a cow, a sheep. In other words, it has a lack of sanctity, and it would have as much awareness as if you were a cow or a goat or an animal of whatever kind. It's it's a fanciful reading of the verse. It can be read that way, but I think the Shalah is reminding us that the task of ritual, and sacrifice is ritual, is to help elevate our sense of spiritual awareness. It provides a vehicle or a symbol, but it's not a substitute. And unfortunately, and this is, I think, very timely, many people who will come to shul say, the Siddur, I'm just sitting there and I'm listening, and it doesn't do anything for me. And actually, it's not supposed to do anything for you. You're supposed to do something with it, right? And if you don't open yourself to it, it's no different than you're flipping burgers on the grill, right? So sacrifice can be something that is a powerful expression of connection with God, or it can be flipping burgers on the grill. So it's not, it's again, korban, to come close to God. We have to do that piece. The ritual is only an invitation. It's a vehicle, but we actually have to get in the vehicle for it to mean anything. I'm going to end with. Go ahead. Your thought.
When I saw this single verse, I thought I had the first verse, because isn't that very unusual when God specifically says, Vayikra Moshe Vaydaberno Othel Moed Lemor, spoke to him at the tent of the meeting. I mean, I've seen a lot of drash on just that first verse. Why is it phrased that way?
Right. Well, Vayikra Moshe is that's Vaydaber Elav,
Yes.
Be'ohel Moed or Me'ohel Moed Lemor that's not so unusual. Vayikra, that's kind of unusual. And the fact that in Torah scrolls the aleph is written with a small aleph is yet another thing that rabbis love to drash. My favorite reading on that is that Moshe, wanted to, out of his own humility, wanted to de-emphasize that God was calling to him specifically. So if you leave off the aleph, Vayikar, it can mean and God, happened upon Moshe, like Mashahu Kara, something happened. Like God was strolling along. Oh, there's Moshe. Oh, Moshe, let me talk to you. As opposed to God calling specifically to Moshe. So Moshe's humility, finds a vehicle of expression. That's lovely. That's probably not, what's going on, but it's a nice drash. But I wanted to leave you with this thought from Yechezkel Kaufman, great scholar of biblical Israel lived in the 20th century, earlier part of the 20th century. Yechezkel Kaufman notes, the purpose of sacrifice was not to propitiate God or bribe him with gifts, as was the case in so much pagan religion, but to establish the regularity and closeness of a relationship with God. That there were different sacrifices such as the olah, the whole burnt offering made twice daily, the shlamim, made frequently as a thanks to God, in which part was eaten by the one who offered it, all speak of different relationships with the divine. Would that we in our prayers were as capable of clearly delineating the different dimensions of our relationship with God as our ancestors were. God has no need of sacrifice. How often have we asked ourselves, does God hear our prayers? Or thought, just show me a sign. We've all heard stories about individuals who explain their belief in God as the result of some tangible synchronicity in their lives, the connection of a wish or prayer to a specific event. It is hardly accidental that the Hebrew root for korban, sacrifice, right, comes from the root, as I said, kuf resh vet, to come closer. Magicians often talk about misdirection, right? A verbal or visual feint that gets the audience to focus away from the spot where the magician's sleight of hand takes place. In seeing sacrifice as a kind of magic ritual, which it never was, we create misdirection for ourselves. Sacrifice isn't about the offering, but the giver. The effect of bringing something we own to God and giving it up, and its effect on us. We can never sense the sacred unless we're willing to give of ourselves. Think about the connection of gimilut chasadim, the sacrifice. Through overcoming the selfish and materialistic impulses of our nature, we become our own sacrifices. Parshat Vayikra teaches, by way of magical misdirection, that the real sacrifice isn't the animal offered up on the altar, but the transformation of the giver's own heart. So if that ain't relevant, I'm not sure what is. Any last minute thoughts or questions, comments, observations, critiques, agreements, disagreements, opinions?
My only comment is that on Vayikra, 60 years ago, I was bar mitzvahed.
Ah,
And I could still remember that I remember one line the rabbi spoke to me when he addressed me. And he said, Roy, and I know that you understood what you read. And, you know, even if I understood everything I read, I still wouldn't have understood what I read. So, but that line has stuck with me for 60 years.
wow.
That's funny.
So thank you.
I'll leave you with the thought that finding meaning in sacrificial law may go against the grain, but it's no bull. You shouldn't feel sheepish.
You should have been chicken to say that.
Bye.
Thank you very much, Rabbi, for doing this.
Oh, no, I mean, it's a pleasure, and it's great. Thank you for bringing Torah to a midday Thursday to me. And please stay safe. I pray that we're all staying well, and look
Careful.
forward to seeing you guys soon, face to face.
Very good.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Have a great day. And a
Thank you.
Shabbat
Thank you.
Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Thank you. Same to everybody. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye, Marco.